Deputy Commissioner Butterworth-Carr, do you know the number of Indigenous women and girls who are missing right now in Canada?
Tonight, RCMP are cross-examined at the National Inquiry.
That I had to run to bring this out because this legislation, if it passes this fall, is going to affect us for generations to come.
We speak with another candidate vying for the job of National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, and calls for action after the most recent not guilty verdict in the shooting death of an Indigenous man. Good evening. Thanks for joining me. I'm Melissa Ridgen. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls spent the week in Regina. It's the first time the inquiry has heard testimony from police who were often in the hot seat. And the head of the RCMP apologized for her force not doing enough to help families. Reporter Brittany Hobson has more.
Asking questions on behalf of a number of families who have loved ones who are missing or murdered.
For the first time since the inquiry started, families and grassroots organizations had a chance to ask the police some questions of their own, and they did not hold back.
Deputy Commissioner Butterworth-Carr, do you know the number of Indigenous women and girls who are missing right now in Canada?
No, I do not.
In 2014, the RCMP themselves put that number at 1,200 cases. Many organizations say the number may actually be as high as 4,000, due in part, the families say, to how the police treat them when reporting an incident, brushing them off or not taking them seriously.
I can completely understand how that perception would be prevalent, and from my perspective and my experience, I would say that we add the resources that are required because everyone's life is valuable.
Okay.
Earlier this week, data was released showing Aboriginal youth make up 46% of youth incarcerated. An audience member asked one of the panels if Canada should begin an inquiry into the over-incarceration of Indigenous people. Former Saskatoon Police Chief Clive Wayhill said no.
I would hope that when we discuss the root causes of Indigenous people through this inquiry, that those answers should be there without having to call another inquiry.
After RCMP Commissioner Brenda Leckie apologized to families, she fielded questions on racism within the ranks.
I can't stop people from what they think, but maybe I can try to change the way they think through education and awareness.
She's pledged the RCMP will do better. This marks the last set of scheduled hearings. The inquiry was granted a 6-month extension earlier this month. They say there may be a possibility of more hearings. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News.
Earlier this month, the remains of a missing woman from Alberta was found in Manitoba. A man from Gladstone, about 150 kilometers west of Winnipeg, has been charged in connection with this case. Jeremy Thompson of CTV Edmonton has reaction from the woman's family.
I felt like as if I could not even lift my own head up.
After 2.5 years of worry and heartache, Norma Gladu got the news she feared about her sister.
Something that I never even thought that could even ever happen to our family.
Gloria Gladu went missing in November 2015. Her remains were found in rural Manitoba earlier this month. The news slowly reaching Gloria's large family.
Hope is what kept us going. I never wanted to accept this outcome. I never even thought it would happen. I honestly thought we were going to get her back.
Nicole Gladu Wiesemat is the oldest of Gloria's 7 children. She was the first to find out her mom's remains had been found.
It was hard as a big sister, calling your siblings one by one and breaking their hearts.
CTV News spoke with Norma back in 2015, just as the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women was getting underway. The Gladu family has participated whenever the inquiry has come through Edmonton, but losing Gloria has made it that much more real.
Her life was not in vain. She was a very, very beautiful woman.
People need to take this seriously. Every life matters, and it feels like nobody cares about these Native women and girls that are going missing or getting murdered.
Police have charged 68-year-old Grant Sneesby with second-degree murder and indecency to a human body. He's in custody, scheduled to appear in an Alberta courtroom July 12th. Jeremy Thompson, CTV News, Edmonton.
We need to take a break, but stick with us. First, here's some weather for tomorrow. News. Rainy day on the Rock, 17 in St. John's, but sun and 21 in Charlottetown, 27 in Halifax. Northern Quebec and Labrador, sun and cloud, 11 in Inukjuak, 10, 7 in Nain. Rain for much of Quebec, 21 in Chibougamau, but 32 in Montreal and Saint-Jovite. A scorcher in southern Ontario, 36 in Ottawa, 35 in Toronto, 31s for the Sioux and North Bay. Lots of cloud in northern Ontario, 35s in Sudbury, 22 in Sioux Lookout. Churchill, Manitoba, 12 and sunny, cloud further south and 18 in Island Lake, 22 in rain in Barons River, mix of sun and cloud and 22s for Brandon and Winnipeg. Some sun and 24 in Saskatoon, 23 in Regina, 21 in Yorkton. And cloud and some sun throughout the north, 19 in Uranium City and Stony Rapids, 21 in Buffalo Narrows and La Ronge. Not everyone will be celebrating Canada Day this year. A group from 6 Nations is calling for a day of action to protest another acquittal in the shooting death of an unarmed Indigenous man. Jonathan Stiers, a 29-year-old Mohawk man, was shot and killed while breaking into a truck. Peter Cahill admitted he shot Stiers and pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder, saying he fired in self-defense, thinking that Stiers had a gun. The trial heard that Stiers did not, in fact, have a gun. Earlier this week, Cahill was acquitted in the death, and a 6 Nations group plans to hold a flash mob at Queen's Park on Canada Day. And they've called on other cities to join in with protests of their own. On that topic, it's the second time this year that a non-Indigenous man admitted to shooting and killing an unarmed Indigenous man on their property. And juries acquitted them in both instances. Mi'kmaq lawyer and activist Pam Palmater joined us to talk about what it all means. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so you know more than your average Joe or Jane about Canadian law. What do you make of this verdict?
Well, first of all, there's no death penalty for alleged crimes. So even if he was trying to steal something from a vehicle or trying to steal the vehicle, the punishment is not the death penalty, and it's certainly not vigilante justice. And on the other hand, you have someone who is allegedly trying to protect their property. You don't get to shoot and kill people to protect property.
But you do. I mean, I guess you do. Yes. He was found not guilty of committing any crime. It wasn't just second-degree murder or manslaughter. Yeah. He was found not guilty of committing any sort of a crime.
It certainly doesn't comply with the law in any way, stretch, or imagination, especially considering the fact that he's an ex-Army reservist. He's well-trained in the use of weapons and when to use them and when not to use them. He wasn't in any danger. He was in the safety of his own place. He was the one who went looking for trouble. He grabs his weapon, goes outside, and shoots someone that's unarmed. There's no way that's anywhere in accordance with the law. And the thing is I guarantee you, if that jury was made up of 12 Indigenous people, it would have been completely different. So when people say race has nothing to do with it, it has everything to do with it. The guy could have called the cops. He could have stayed in his house. He could have yelled from a window and said, "Hey, dude, get out of there," and it probably would have scared him away. None of his arguments made sense. Yeah. Because his main defense was, first of all, it was self-defense. Well, that guy wasn't attacking him. Right. It was the other way around. And second of all, he was in fear of his life. Why would you run towards something that was scary? I certainly wouldn't go swim in an ocean if I saw a great white shark there. I would be scared of that. He went well beyond the norm of what he should have done. And it shows his own racist assumptions. One, you have to assume that Native people are inherently dangerous.
Well, he did say he didn't know the race of the person who was in his truck.
That's what he was claiming. He said it was too dark. How many people who are trained in weapons do you know that shoot blindly into the dark? And in fact, he actually shot the guy at point blank range. Yeah. So at point blank range, I'm sure by then he knew exactly who the person was. And second of all, he made the assumption that he was carrying a gun. Why would you assume that? Yeah. Why does everyone assume that Native people are carrying guns?
Well, or you could make that assumption, I suppose, but if you act on that assumption, this person isn't carrying a gun, didn't point it at you or anything, and you kill that person, there should be presumably a guilty verdict, and there's not. So my next question, I guess, would be: is the problem with the juries? Is it with the law itself? I thought the law seemed clear on this. Is the law the problem? Is it the juries? Is it the judge's orders to the jury when they're deliberating? Where's the problem? Because this isn't the first time we've seen this with Quote Mbushi too. Where do we have the problem, and what do we do to fix it, I guess?
So most of the time people focus on the law. Oh, we have to fix the law, we have to fix the law. Well, it's already against the law to shoot and kill somebody. It's against the law. Unless they're trying to shoot you and kill you.
Yeah.
So it's already against the law, so we know it's not the law. Let's put that aside. But then you look at the judge's instructions to the jury. Well, he didn't just say you can only look at first-degree murder or second-degree murder. He also provided the option of manslaughter. If you don't think that he intended to do it, but by his actions should have known better, and I think most human beings would have known better, you could have found him guilty of manslaughter. But no, they're just like, he's not guilty of anything. So that's a problem of race. It's a problem of who deserves to live and who deserves to die. Because I guarantee you, if that was the son or daughter of anyone on that jury, there would have been, well, you should have called the cops like any normal person would have done, or you should have, talked to the person or yelled from the safety of your window or called a neighbor or done one of 1,000 other things that normal people do. Yeah. You don't go and race and get your weapon and shoot someone point blank range. That's like an assassination.
So what do we do? I mean, if the problem isn't the court system, it's not the law, it's society looks and devalues these people to the point where it's okay to have open season on them. How do we fix that?
Well, and so we're in a crisis, essentially. So if you've got a scenario twofold: one, they can't put Indigenous peoples in jail fast enough. Yeah. We're over incarcerated, so we're not getting any justice there because of racism. And then when people do harm to us, murdered and missing Indigenous women, the rapes of our children and human trafficking, or the murders of our men, and we can't get any justice there, then what? They're creating this public safety crisis. And so it's going to require a lot of advocacy and a lot of pressure on politicians by Indigenous peoples. Again, the burden seems to always be on us to say, we're not going to accept this. And you'll see that I believe it's the Grandmothers in Six Nations, they're organizing a protest. But if you look at the teepees that are at the Wascana property out in Saskatchewan, the reason why those First Nations are erecting teepees on that territory against the direction of the province is because they're trying to bring attention to all of the children that they have that are killed or murdered by police officers, by people in society, in child and family services, and they get no justice. All they want is justice.
We're going to have to leave it there. We could probably sit all day and bang our heads on this. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
A 59-year-old fisherman from the Lytton First Nation in British Columbia is missing. He was last seen net fishing along the shore of the Fraser River. Tina House has this story.
On June 19, 2018, 59-year-old Dwayne Alvin Alec was last seen around 9 p.m. He was fishing along the bank of the Fraser River near Lytton, BC. His nephew, Ivan Michel, is worried about his uncle.
He went down and he was repairing his net, and he had packed food for overnight to stay over so he could put his net out. And I guess what happened was his net may have got snagged up, and he went out to untangle it. And the net released, and he went downriver with a buoy or a red or orange life preserver.
And Michelle says that this river is especially dangerous this time of year, with strong currents and debris. The family claimed that RCMP and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans have done little to help in the search.
When the reports were made, the police never went down. They never went down to his fishing site. They showed up to the top, but they said they don't want to go down. And they sat there and they never completed their report. They sent people down to a bridge below, I believe, Hell's Gate, and until it was dark, and they abandoned it after they couldn't see.
However, RCMP have said they've launched 2 helicopter searches along the river and say that they are now looking at more of a recovery mission than a rescue. Local rafting businesses have also been notified to keep an eye out. Alec is a well-respected shaman in his community and is a father and grandfather. Community members have started combing the area on the water and shorelines.
My heart, it goes up and down with sights of floating objects or colors in the tree line, right? There's always tarps or something, so it's always a rush that goes up and then it comes down. It's a happy feeling when I know it's not him, but it's a sad feeling when I can see something that I need to check.
Family and friends have launched boards from where he went missing with information on it, hoping that this will help them pinpoint where he may have ended up. They have also started a GoFundMe page to help in their efforts to find Dwayne Alec. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
We've got to go to another break, but first, here's the rest of your weather. Grand Prairie, Peace River, and Fort Chip, 20. Sun and cloud through central and southern Alberta. 23 is the hot spot in Medicine Hat. Rain for Vancouver and 18 but sun and cloud in Victoria. 17 up in Bella Coola. Northern BC, sunny and mild, 16 for Smithers and Dease Lake, 21 in Fort Nelson. Cloudy for most of the Yukon, 16 in Whitehorse, 18 in Dawson City. Only Yellowknife and Fort Resolution can expect some sun, 18 and 17 in those communities. 11 in Saxe Harbor and Tuck, 13 in Colville Lake. Lots of sun on the northwest shore of the Hudson's Bay, 13 in Chesterfield, 8 Whale Cove, 9 Arviat. Up north, we've got 3 in Resolute and Clyde River, 6 for Iqaluit. The election for AFN National Chief is July 25th in Vancouver. 5 people are running. We've already talked to incumbent Perry Bellegarde from Saskatchewan and Ontario's Miles Richardson. Tonight, Russ Diabo, also of Ontario. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Diabo. So why have you decided to run for National Chief?
Well, I decided to run because I think we're in a situation just as critical as we were in 1969 with the White Paper on Indian Policy. This recognition and implementation of rights framework that Prime Minister Trudeau is pushing is basically to recognize and implement rights that they're defining, and they're going to use their co-relations policies to force us into accepting their definition of our rights. So I want to get that message out to the chiefs, our people, and the Canadian public that the Trudeau government's perpetrating a fraud. That's why I've decided to run.
So do you think in the past 4 years since the last AFN National Chief election, explain to me what you think the relationship with Canada has been for First Nations people in Canada. Is it better, worse? How has it changed in this past 4 years?
Well, I think it's worse because I think the National Chief has failed to keep control of the process, and he's basically been a cheerleader for this government. He's allowed this government to take over and define our terminology through nation to nation and reconciliation, them giving their own meaning to it. They've imposed this 10 principles basically to recolonize us, these 10 principles on Indigenous relationships. They've unilaterally decided to dissolve the Department of Indian Affairs and restructure the federal government without our people's involvement and even without AFN's involvement. So the National Chief has failed to do any critical analysis of these changes to policy, laws, or structure.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so, based on that, I felt that I had to run to bring this out because this legislation, if it passes this fall, is going to affect us for generations to come.
There's a lot of people who say, many critics who say that they don't feel that AFN is relevant and certainly doesn't represent the grassroots people. You've been a vocal critic of AFN yourself. So what do you say to these people who are watching another election come and go, and maybe with a little disinterest?
Well, I can understand their feelings, but when you're talking about AFN, you've got to talk about the PTOs and you've got to talk to the band offices in our community, the chief and councils. It's the whole Indian Act structure that AFN is based on. So you can't just talk about dissolving AFN. You got to look at dissolving the whole Indian Act colonial system. And one of the parts of my platform is to go for fundamental reform of the Assembly of First Nations because I know it's not working. and it hasn't worked. You know, I worked for 2 past national chiefs, so I know that organization from the inside, and it definitely needs to be changed and include the people's voices more. But it's not just AFN, it's from the communities on up, you know, the band offices on up. We have to go beyond just the chief and council and band staff, you know, reporting to Ottawa. It's a bigger system of change that we need, including in our thinking. We need to change our thinking before we can change our behavior.
How do you even begin to reconstruct what is the AFN? Where do you begin?
Well, the AFN Charter provides for you know, special assembly to be called to change or rewrite the Charter of the Assembly First Nations. That's one of the first things that I would work on, is moving to get a special assembly as quickly as possible to get the chiefs together to discuss how to rewrite the Charter to restructure it, because they're not even following the Charter as it exists now. They don't hold Confederacy of Nations meetings, which is representation by population. And the checks and balances that are in the Charter are all messed up now because they're not relying on one body that the Charter provides for, you know, the Confederacy of Nations. So that's what I would do, is move quickly to see the Charter rewritten and the AFN fundamentally restructured.
And then in terms of the Indian Act, so I mean, you've got your hands full restructuring AFN if you're successful. Jody Wilson-Raybould had mentioned soon after her election that there was a need to get rid of the Indian Act. Is there time within the mandate, do you think, this 4-year mandate, to even tackle something like that? Or is there a willingness?
Look, the Trudeau government's been implementing a national plan, as I mentioned, by dissolving the Department of Indian Affairs, having this secret law and policy review that Jody Wilson-Raybould heads up, these 10 principles on Indigenous relationships. Now they want to bring in recognition legislation, all of which are people who've had nothing to say. You know, they haven't been participating in any of these processes. So it's the Minister of Justice, Michael Warnick, you know, who was the Deputy Minister under Harper for 10 years, that's behind this plan. He's the Clerk of the Privy Council. So it's the Justice Minister, him, the Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's staff, and the Prime Minister's office who are really behind this plan. Minister Philpott and Minister Bennett, along with Joe Wild, this Assistant Deputy Minister, doing this national engagement process, are in front, but they're not really the ones implementing this national plan. And where's our plan? The AFN has failed to develop a national plan to counter what the Trudeau government's doing. As I said, they basically become a cheerleader for this government. And we need a national chief that will stand toe-to-toe with them and make sure that we have a national advocate, not a national chief.
I appreciate very much your perspective and your time for this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all the news I have for you tonight, but I leave you with this little dancer who made a big impact on National Indigenous Peoples Day in Camrose, Alberta. 2-year-old Albert Absassin finally got his first opportunity to dance in front of a crowd, and he did not disappoint.